From the very beginning, my relationship with my sisters has been a powder keg waiting to explode. It's not just that I don't like them. It runs deeper than that. Every interaction feels like walking on eggshells, knowing their envy and arrogance are weapons they wield without hesitation. They've always seen me as competition, someone who somehow got lucky in life while they trudged along with their mundane existences. Their resentment festers like an open wound, poisoning every family gathering. At holidays or barbecues, their cutting remarks slice through the air, subtle jabs about my career, my marriage, even how I dress. To them, I'm not just a sibling. I'm a mirror reflecting everything they wish they had but can't attain. Their jealousy isn't passive. It's venomous and deliberate. They gossip behind my back, twisting stories to paint me as selfish or entitled, all while basking in the illusion of their own martyrdom. The worst part? My parents hear these lies too, and though they try to stay neutral, the tension is palpable. I feel their judgmental stares during dinner conversations when my accomplishments come up. My sisters act like predators circling prey, eager to tear down anything good in my life so they can feel superior by comparison. And then there's the constant pressure, the unspoken demand that I share what I have, whether it's money, property, or opportunities. But giving in would only feed their insatiable greed. This isn't just dislike. This is a toxic battlefield where every move is calculated, every word laced with malice. Little did I know, this simmering hatred would soon boil over into something far more destructive, a storm that would test the limits of family loyalty and leave scars no one could foresee. TT2. The barbecue had already been an exercise in thinly veiled hostility, but what happened next turned the gathering into a full-blown catastrophe. As I stood near the edge of the pool, trying to maintain some semblance of civility despite my sister's cutting remarks and their husbands' drunken antics, I noticed 3 of my nieces and nephews sprinting toward me with mischievous grins plastered across their faces. It was clear they intended to push me into the water, a childish prank that would have been annoying but harmless under different circumstances. However, this wasn't just about shoving someone into a pool. It felt like another calculated move by my sisters' families to humiliate me in front of everyone. I managed to sidestep them at the last second, but their momentum carried them straight into the deep end of the pool. At first, laughter erupted from the crowd as we all assumed they were simply horsing around. But within seconds, panic set in. 2 of the children began flailing wildly, their small arms thrashing against the surface as they struggled to stay afloat. My heart sank as I realized they couldn't swim. Not well enough for the deep end anyway. The chaos that followed was deafening. My brothers-in-law, fueled by alcohol and misplaced rage, started screaming accusations at me, pointing fingers as if I had personally thrown their kids into the water. One of them even lunged forward, his fists clenched, shouting threats loud enough to drown out the cries of the children still struggling in the pool. While others rushed to pull the kids out, I took a step back, my mind racing with disbelief and anger. This wasn't just negligence on my sister's part. It was reckless endangerment, and now I was being painted as the villain. Their husbands weren't content with verbal attacks either. The older one, red-faced and seething, grabbed my arm and shoved me hard, muttering something about teaching me a lesson. His aggression only added fuel to the fire, escalating the situation further. By the time the kids were finally safe, sobbing hysterically while clutching towels, the atmosphere had shifted from festive to toxic. My sisters joined the tirade, accusing me of ruining the day and demanding I take responsibility for everything, even though they were the ones who failed to supervise their own children. As the argument spiraled out of control, my wife intervened, her stern glare momentarily silencing the room. But the damage was done. What should have been a simple family get-together had devolved into a battleground, leaving scars no one could ignore. And unbeknownst to any of us, this was only the beginning of a much larger storm brewing beneath the surface. The secret about the vacation home, which I had kept hidden for years to avoid drama, became the spark that ignited a wildfire of betrayal and chaos. My sister's greed knew no bounds. They didn't just ask to rent it out. They stole its use behind my back, pocketing over $22,000 per weekend rental without a shred of guilt. What made this revelation even more gut-wrenching was the catastrophic aftermath of one such unauthorized party. A group of unruly renters turned the serene mountain retreat into a frat house nightmare, trashing every corner of the property. Furniture was broken, walls were vandalized with graffiti, and the once pristine deck overlooking the valley was left splintered and unsafe. When I arrived at the house after receiving an alarming call from the property manager, Mike, I felt like I'd walked into a war zone. The stench of spilled alcohol and cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air, while shattered glass crunched underfoot. It wasn't just cosmetic damage, it was structural devastation. And as if things couldn't get worse, there were legal implications looming over me. As the official owner, I could be held liable for any injuries sustained during these reckless parties. My stomach churned as I imagined lawsuits piling up, threatening not only my finances, but also the peaceful life I'd worked so hard to build. Confronting my sisters later that week felt like stepping into a lion's den. Their excuses were pathetic. They claimed they needed the money and thought I wouldn't mind since I rarely used the place. But their lies unraveled when I showed them photos of the destruction and screenshots of their private messages boasting about the profits. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined. How could they jeopardize something meant to bring joy to our parents? This wasn't negligence. It was calculated exploitation, and it shattered whatever trust remained between us. The tension between my family and me had already reached a boiling point, but what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. After I explicitly banned my sisters and their husbands from using the vacation house, they didn't just sulk or complain, they retaliated with calculated destruction. It was early Friday morning when Mike, the property manager, called me in a panic. My heart sank as he described the scene unfolding before his eyes. My brothers-in-law had broken into the property with an angle grinder, leaving behind a trail of devastation. The once pristine driveway gate now lay mangled on the ground, its heavy-duty chains severed like thread. They hadn't stopped there. The front door was gouged so badly it looked like it had been attacked by a wild animal. But the worst part? They broke into the utility room and even attempted to set fire to the storage barn. When the local deputies arrived, alerted by the security system's motion sensors, the chaos escalated into something out of a crime drama. Mike later recounted how my brothers-in-law tried to justify their actions, claiming they were just checking on the place. But their lies crumbled under scrutiny, especially when confronted with footage from the newly installed surveillance cameras. The sight of them wielding tools and vandalizing the property sent chills down my spine. What struck me most was their audacity. These weren't desperate men acting on impulse, but entitled individuals who believed they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. By the time I spoke to the sheriff's office hours later, my anger had morphed into something darker, a mix of disbelief and betrayal. My wife listened silently as I vented, her expression unreadable. She finally spoke up, saying, "This isn't about the house anymore. It's about control." And she was right. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a declaration of war. As the deputies led my brothers-in-law away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a bitter satisfaction. Yet, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a long, painful battle. The financial unraveling of my eldest sister was the final nail in the coffin of our already fractured family dynamic. What started as subtle hints of strain, her husband boasting less about his high-powered job and their vacations becoming fewer and farther between, exploded into a full-blown crisis that blindsided everyone, including my parents. On a tense Tuesday evening, she broke down in front of Mom, revealing the grim reality they had been hiding for years. Their credit cards were maxed out, their car leases were on the verge of repossession, and their once lavish lifestyle had become an unsustainable facade. But the most devastating blow: they couldn't afford to keep their kids enrolled in private school, a privilege they had always flaunted as proof of their success. Desperation turned her into someone unrecognizable. She began bombarding my parents with calls, pleading for loans or any form of financial lifeline. But when that failed, her desperation shifted toward me. Her tone changed from pleading to accusatory. She claimed I owed them something because I had more than enough. It wasn't just idle threats either. She insinuated that if I didn't let them use the vacation home again, she'd accuse me of sabotaging her financially, and even hinted at legal action over some fabricated grievance. The audacity of it left me speechless. How could she twist years of reckless spending into my responsibility? Her husband joined the crusade, calling my office repeatedly under the guise of needing to discuss family matters. When I refused to engage, he escalated, leaving voicemails filled with thinly veiled threats about exposing supposed family secrets. Each message felt like a grenade lobbed into my otherwise peaceful life. My wife urged me not to respond, warning that engaging would only fuel their hysteria. Yet the pressure mounted. Every call, every text, every mention of their impending ruin felt like another layer of emotional blackmail designed to break me. And while part of me pitied their situation, the larger part recoiled at their willingness to destroy relationships for personal gain. It was a stormy night, the kind where rain lashes against the windows and thunder shakes the house. I had just settled into bed when my phone rang, a call from my mom at 1:37 a.m. My heart sank as she sobbed hysterically on the other end, telling me that my eldest sister had overdosed on sleeping pills and was being rushed to the hospital. "She's blaming everything on you," Mom cried. "She said this is all because of the stress you've put her through." The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. Without hesitation, I threw on some clothes, woke my wife, and sped through the pouring rain toward the ER. When we arrived, the scene was chaotic. My parents pacing anxiously in the waiting room while my middle sister clung to her phone, scrolling frantically through messages. My brother-in-law sat slumped in a chair, his face buried in his hands. No one spoke to us directly. Instead, they shot accusatory glares our way. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor finally emerged, confirming that my sister was stable but would need monitoring overnight. Relief washed over everyone except me. Something about the situation didn't sit right. As the hours dragged on, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. A nurse mentioned offhandedly that my sister had only taken a small dose, not nearly enough to be life-threatening, and that she'd called 911 herself within minutes of swallowing the pills. Then came the kicker. My mom accidentally revealed that my sister had been texting her throughout the evening, complaining about how unfair I was being by refusing to let them use the vacation home again. It became painfully clear that this wasn't a cry for help. It was a calculated move designed to guilt-trip me into submission. By morning, my suspicions were confirmed. When confronted, my sister broke down, not out of remorse but anger. She accused me of ruining her life, claiming that without access to the property, she'd lose everything. Her theatrics left me cold. This wasn't concern for her well-being. It was desperation masked as vulnerability. As I walked away from the hospital, I realized something crucial. These people weren't capable of genuine emotion. They thrived on manipulation, and I couldn't let them control me anymore. The family meeting that was supposed to resolve things only escalated into a verbal bloodbath. What started as a tense discussion about the vacation home quickly devolved into personal attacks, accusations, and outright hostility. My sisters unleashed years of pent-up resentment, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, and manipulative. Their husbands chimed in with their own venomous remarks, questioning my integrity and even mocking my career choices. The air crackled with animosity, each word sharper than the last. My wife sat silently beside me, her jaw clenched, while my parents tried, and failed, to mediate. Things reached a boiling point when the elder brother-in-law, red-faced and seething, accused me of ruining his family's future. "You think you're better than us?" he spat, slamming his fist on the table so hard it rattled the dishes. Before I could respond, he lunged at me, his bulky frame knocking over chairs in his fury. Chaos erupted instantly. My middle sister screamed hysterically, while the other brother-in-law attempted to intervene but ended up shoving me instead. It was surreal, like watching a scene from an action movie, except this was real life, and there was no script or happy ending in sight. My dad shouted for everyone to stop, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of yelling and screeching furniture. My mom burst into tears pleading for peace, but her cries went ignored. In the midst of the chaos, I managed to push the elder brother-in-law off me, though not without sustaining a bruised arm. For a moment, everything froze, eyes wide, breaths ragged, the room heavy with disbelief. But the damage had been done. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was war. And as we all stood there, battered and bruised emotionally and physically, one thing became painfully clear. Reconciliation was impossible. Just when I thought the chaos couldn't get worse, I stumbled upon a revelation that made my blood run cold. While reviewing security footage from the vacation property one evening, something caught my eye. A meeting between my sisters and their husbands near the edge of the lot. At first glance, it seemed innocent enough, but then I noticed blueprints spread out on the hood of a car. My stomach churned as I zoomed in on the grainy footage. They were planning to divide the land into lots and build at least 3 luxury homes for profit. The audacity of it left me speechless. This wasn't just greed. It was betrayal on an unimaginable scale. The property had always been intended as a peaceful retreat for our parents, yet here were my siblings plotting to exploit it for financial gain without so much as a word to me. It became clear why they'd been desperate to regain access. They weren't interested in family vacations or preserving memories. Their sole focus was turning this idyllic mountain haven into a cash cow. If Mike, the property manager, hadn't alerted me about strange activity during his routine checks, I might never have discovered their scheme until it was too late. When confronted, my sisters tried to downplay it, claiming it was just an idea and accusing me of overreacting. But their defensive tone only confirmed my suspicions. They even had the nerve to argue that since they'd always used the place, they deserved a say in its future. The hypocrisy was staggering. Thankfully, the cameras and reinforced locks ensured they couldn't move forward with their plans. Still, the realization shook me to my core. How could they value money over family? Every fiber of trust I once held for them crumbled in that moment. After months of relentless chaos, I finally made the hardest decision of my life: to sever all ties with my sisters and their husbands, and to sell the vacation home that had become a symbol of both joy and torment. It wasn't just a house, it was my parents' dream, a sanctuary they envisioned for their golden years. Yet, every time I thought about what had transpired, broken gates, vandalized doors, lawsuits, and endless manipulation, the weight of those memories crushed any hope of peace. The betrayal ran so deep that keeping the property felt like carrying a ticking time bomb. Selling it would mean shattering my parents' dream, but holding on to it meant perpetuating a cycle of toxicity I could no longer endure. The day I informed my parents, their faces said it all: disappointment mixed with resignation. They didn't argue, though I could see the pain in their eyes. For them, the house represented more than 4 walls and a roof. It was a place where family should have thrived, not fractured. But even they couldn't deny how far things had spiraled out of control. As much as it hurt, I knew this was the only way forward. For me, for my wife, and perhaps even for them. Letting go of the house felt like severing a limb, but clinging to it would only prolong the agony. What stung most was knowing my sisters would never understand. To them, selling the property wasn't just an act of closure. It was another personal attack, another reason to resent me. And maybe they were right. Maybe I was punishing them by taking away something they coveted. But at some point, self-preservation outweighed guilt. Still, as I signed the papers to list the house, a wave of grief washed over me. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning filled with uncertainty. Would my parents forgive me? Could I ever find peace without looking back? Only time would tell.